Welcome to the Heartbreak Chronicles, where every story is a raw reflection of life. Hit that subscribe button to stay tuned, give us a like to show your support, and share this episode with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story. The moment she walked out that door, Kurt knew this day would come. The end of this marriage was long overdue, but they were both running away from that harsh reality. Over the months, Sue became increasingly distant, sometimes irritable, sometimes unusually cold, sometimes even hostile. Everything Kurt tried was like talking to air, with no echo. The few pleasant moments they have had between them have only been in the company of friends, and with the help of outside forces to escape their stifling lives for a while. Kurt Randolph stood on the porch, looking at Sue's departing back with mixed feelings. 26 years of married life came to an end so quietly. There was no heated argument, no hysterical crying, just a soft sigh as if it was a final farewell to the relationship. Looking back, Kurt wonders when exactly their marriage began to crack. For the most part, their marriage was pretty good, not perfect, but passable. Their 3 children, Glenn, Julia, and Rachel, are all healthy and happy. 2 are still in college, and 1 just graduated 6 months ago. Perhaps it was this opportunity that sparked the problem between them. Empty nest syndrome seems to have hit Sue hard. She was a different person when her first child left home for college. No matter how much Kurt hinted, cajoled, or even pleaded, things didn't get better. The intimacy between them disappeared without a trace, and arguments became commonplace. Eventually, Kurt gave up. Why go after someone you clearly don't want to be close to? Recently, Sue has changed again, and for the worse. Kurt begins to wonder if there's some unspoken secret that's haunting her. He worked 50 to 60 hours a week as a manufacturing engineer for a company in Aberdeen, South Dakota. The job paid well, but sometimes required him to be on call and often missed weekend events. After a week of asking around, Kurt's best friend Paul finally brings the heartbreaking news. "You guessed it, Kurt," Paul said, sympathy in his voice. He tells Kurt that Sue has been having lunch with a man every week for 3 months. The news came from Paul's cousin Carol, a co-worker of Sue's at Central States Printing. Sue is 48 years old and has been an administrative assistant at Midstate Printing for 15 years. The man, David Perkins, was a sales rep for Heartland Paper Mills, 10 years younger than Sue, divorced, with 2 children. He is said to have cheated on his wife, once causing his marriage to fall apart. An anger flared in Kurt, but more than that, a deep sense of disappointment and betrayal. He began to recall Sue's unusual behavior over the past few months, often working overtime, suddenly having urgent matters to deal with on weekends, and always absent-mindedly checking his cell phone. All the clues point to one heartbreaking fact: Sue betrayed their marriage. It was at that moment that Kurt made up his mind to get to the bottom of it. He knew he might need to resort to some extraordinary means, but he had to know the whole truth. With a heavy heart, Kurt begins to consider his next move. Kurt's cell phone suddenly rings late at night, and it's his best friend Paul. "Kurt, I'm sorry to bother you so late." Paul's voice sounded heavy, "but I think you need to know this." Kurt felt his heart racing. "What's wrong, Paul?" Paul took a deep breath. "Carol saw Sue with a man today. They're in a coffee shop near the Midstate Printing Company." "Kurt, they seem not like regular friends." Carol said they were holding hands, and the way she hadn't seen Sue that happy in a long time. Kurt felt a wave of vertigo as his suspicions were finally confirmed. The anger and sense of betrayal came over him like a tidal wave, almost suffocating him. "Thanks for telling me this, Paul," Kurt said with difficulty. "I'll need some time to digest the news." After hanging up, Kurt stayed up all night. He thought over and over about Sue's unusual behavior over the past few months, and now it all had an explanation. The next morning, Kurt is determined to take action. He contacted a divorce attorney, Sarah. In her office, Kurt details his suspicions and the information Paul has provided. Sarah listened carefully and said, "Kurt, I understand your pain, but we need more hard evidence. Have you considered hiring a private investigator?" Kurt hesitates. Wouldn't that be too much?" Sarah said gently, "In this case, it was necessary to protect your rights. Also, I would suggest that you could install a GPS tracker on Sue's car." If she really is cheating, we need to have enough evidence. After much deliberation, Kurt agrees to Sarah's proposal. He hires a private investigator and secretly installs a GPS tracker on Sue's car. Over the next few days, Kurt was distracted, constantly checking the GPS app on his cell phone, following Sue's every move. Thursday night, Sue tells Kurt she's going to the hot springs for the weekend. "I need some time alone," Sue said, a look on her face that Kurt couldn't decipher. Kurt nodded his head in agreement, pretending not to care, but inside he was turning over. The next morning, Sue set off with gusto. Kurt immediately contacts the private investigator and informs him of Sue's plan of action. Kurt then sets off in his own car, following the track of Sue's vehicle on the GPS. Sue's car eventually stopped at a fancy resort in Sioux Falls. Kurt parked his car on the far side, put on a baseball cap and sunglasses as a disguise, and walked into the resort. His palms were sweaty and his heart was pounding like thunder, unsure of what he was about to face. In the resort's terrace restaurant, Kurt sees a scene that breaks his heart. Sue is sitting at a table in the corner with a handsome man, the two of them behaving intimately, with nothing but each other in their eyes. Kurt recognizes the man as David Perkins, a sales representative for Heartland Paper Mills. Kurt hid behind a pillar and watched as Sue gently stroked David's hand before the two smiled at each other and slowly moved closer. They kissed at the dinner table, oblivious to the stares of those around them, immersed in their own world. Kurt felt a wave of nausea, but he forced himself to keep watching and captured it all on his cell phone. After dinner, Kurt quietly follows Sue and David to the grove at the edge of the resort. Moonlight poured through the leaves, creating dappled shadows on the ground. Kurt hid behind a thick oak tree, holding his breath and staring straight ahead. Sue and David walked hand in hand into a secluded clearing surrounded by thick underbrush. Kurt saw David gently pull Sue into his arms, and they began kissing passionately. Sue's hands caressed David's back while David's hands explored the curves of Sue's body. Kurt felt his stomach lurch, but he forced himself to keep watching. He saw David begin to unbutton Sue's shirt while Sue eagerly tugged at David's belt. One by one, the clothes fell to the ground, and in the moonlight, the two intertwined figures were gradually revealed. The air was damp and earthy and, if anything, floral, but it was soon replaced by sharp gasps and suppressed moans. Kurt saw Sue tilt her head back, an enraptured look on her face he hadn't seen in years. David's lips roamed over Sue's neck, eliciting a soft sigh of contentment from her. Kurt felt a wave of vertigo as his hands trembled uncontrollably and he could barely hold the infrared camera steady. But he knew he had to document it. The camera faithfully captured the scene before them, storing every movement of Sue and David's intimacy in crystal clear detail. Sue and David's actions became more and more intense as time went on. Kurt saw Sue's nails sink deep into David's back while David grabbed Sue's hips hard. Their panting grew heavier and their movements faster and faster until the final moment came. When everything calmed down, Kurt saw Sue snuggled in David's arms with a happy smile on her face. David kisses Sue's forehead gently and tenderly. This intimate scene was even more heartbreaking for Kurt than the passion that preceded it. Kurt turns off the camera and silently exits the woods. His legs were as heavy as lead, and each step seemed to take all his strength. Back at the motel, Kurt sat paralyzed on his bed, feeling all the strength drain from his body. He mechanically turned on the camera and played back what he had just filmed. Each frame was like a sharp knife, stabbing hard into his heart. Kurt saw happiness and contentment spread across Sue's face, an expression he hadn't seen on her face in a long time. Kurt turned off the device and sighed deeply. He picked up his cell phone and dialed Sarah's number. "I'm going to file for divorce," he said, determination and exhaustion in his voice, "and I've got all the evidence I need." Sarah was silent for a moment, then said, "I understand, Kurt. I'll start preparing the divorce papers immediately. Are you okay?" Kurt laughed bitterly. "No, I'm not good at all, but I knew I had to do it. The marriage is over." After hanging up the phone, Kurt looked out the window into the night. He knew that from now on, everything would be different. Though still filled with pain and anger inside, he had made up his mind to end the marriage, which was full of lies. Because life always goes on, and he, Kurt Randolph, is ready for a new challenge. Although the road ahead is full of unknowns and hardships, he believes he will eventually regain his happiness. Tomorrow, when Sue returns, divorce papers will await her instead of the usual welcoming hug. Kurt knows that this decision will change all of their lives forever, but he has no choice. The truth has come out, and it's time to face reality. Kurt took a deep breath and looked around the living room at his 3 children. Glenn, Julia, and Rachel were sitting on the couch with puzzled and worried looks on their faces. He knew what he was about to say next would change their family forever. "Boys," Kurt spoke, his voice shaking a little, "I have something important to tell you. Your mother and we've decided to get a divorce." The room fell instantly into dead silence. Rachel was the first to react as she jumped up and exclaimed, "What? No, that's not possible." Glenn frowned. "Dad, what does that mean? What happened?" Julia, on the other hand, sat quietly as tears began to well up in her eyes. Kurt struggled to explain how he found out Sue was cheating on him, trying to avoid using overly hurtful words. When he finished, all 3 children were lost in their own emotions. Sue returned home a few days later. She pushed open the door to her home and saw her bags neatly arranged in the doorway. She paused and took a deep breath. It's the moment she knows Kurt has found out everything and their marriage is coming to an end. Surprisingly, Sue didn't feel too sorry for herself. Instead, she felt a strange sense of relief. This marriage had long been her shackle, and now she could finally break free. However, Sue's heart sank again at the thought of the impending disputes, especially regarding the children and property. Just then, Kurt walked out of the den with an icy look on his face. Anger burned in Kurt's eyes as he pressed closer to Sue, his voice low and threatening. "Do you really think you're in a position to fight for custody of your children and your property? Dream on. What right does a shameless slut have to be a mother?" Sue's eyes widened, shocked for a moment by Kurt's choice of words, but quickly shot back. "Oh, now you're finally showing your true colors? Who the hell do you think you are? A saint? A pathetic man who only knows how to stick his dick in the money." Kurt sneered. "At least I have room to stick my dick in. What about you? Has it gotten so loose that even that little white boy can't satisfy you?" Sue's face turned red. "You asshole. You don't know me at all. Never did. David at least knows how to please a woman, unlike you, who just shrugs himself a few times and that's it." Kurt felt an intense wave of humiliation and anger. "Pleasing you? Huh. I see you. He's just greedy for novelty. Let's see if he'll still want you when he realizes you're in this old body." A flicker of hurt flashed in Sue's eyes, but was quickly replaced by anger. "You think you're so great? A middle-aged, balding loser who can't do anything but work. I'm so sorry I wasted all those years on you." Kurt gritted his teeth. "I'm the one wasting my life. I'm so blind to be with a cold-blooded, selfish, backstabbing woman like you." Sue looked at Kurt coldly. "You know what? I feel sick every time I sleep with you. I'm only barely able to tolerate your disgusting touch because I'm thinking of other men." Kurt's face contorted. "You bitch. I wish I hadn't married you in the first place. Maybe then I'd be with a real woman right now instead of a lowly bitch like you." Sue suddenly laughed, a smile filled with sarcasm. "Oh, Kurt, you're pathetic. You think you can find something better without me? Dream on. Who would want a man like you but a blind, stupid woman like me?" Kurt felt a wave of vertigo and anger almost consumed him. "Shut up, you unashamed slut. I curse you to never be happy. You'll end up alone and no one will love you, just like you deserve." A flash of fear flashed in Sue's eyes, but she quickly hid it. "Each other, dear. I'd like to see how you punks can live without me. Just wait and see. Not only am I going to get custody of the kids, but I'm going to squeeze every last penny out of you." Kurt sneered. "Since you're so shameless that you still want to fight me for custody and property, let your loved ones see you for what you are first. And then we'll show the judge what kind of person and mother you are." Sue felt a sudden surge of fear, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Don't you dare." Kurt sneered and pulled out his cell phone. "Watch?" He quickly called Sue's parents and siblings and asked them to come to the house immediately. An hour later, Sue's family arrived. Kurt played that video shot at the resort. Sue looks on in horror at the picture of herself and David in an intimate scene, while her family is dumbfounded. Sue's family watched dumbfounded as the video ended and the room went dead silent. Sue's father, the ever-majestic old Mr. Thompsonville, was pale and his hands trembled slightly. Is this true, Sue?" His voice was hoarse with disbelief. Sue kept her head down, unable to look anyone in the eye. She felt the blood in her body freeze. Sue's mother suddenly erupted into a sob. "My God, Sue, how could you? How could you do this to Kurt, to your children?" Sue's brother Mike stood up with anger and contempt in his eyes. "You've really let us down, Sue. Kurt has been a good husband and father. How could you betray him, betray this family?" Sue tried to argue. I have my reasons." But her sister Sarah interrupted her. "Bitterness? What kind of bitterness could make you act like this? Do you realize how much damage you've done to this family?" Kurt stood by, watching it all. He felt a twinge of vengeful pleasure, but more than that, a deep sadness. Sue's father finally stood up, his voice heavy. "Kurt, we apologize to you for Sue's behavior. About the kids, we trust you to make the best decision." "Sue," he turned to his own daughter with disappointment in his eyes, "you have dishonored our family." When Sue's family leaves, Sue breaks down. She curled up on the couch and cried silently. Kurt looked at her and felt a wave of mixed emotions. A few weeks later, the divorce hearing began. In the courtroom, Kurt and Sue sat on opposite sides of the room, as if an invisible wall separated them. The judge looked at the two men gravely, based on the evidence presented, particularly the video and photographs provided by Kurt. The court finds that Sue's behavior constitutes gross marital betrayal. Sue kept her head down, unable to look anyone in the eye. Kurt, meanwhile, stares intently at the judge, waiting for the final verdict. Taking all factors into account, the court awarded primary custody to Mr. Kurt, with Sue required to pay alimony. Regarding the division of property, when the judge announced the verdict, Kurt felt a wave of relief, but also a twinge of sadness. 26 years of marriage, and that was the end of it. After the court's sentencing, Kurt and Sue rubbed shoulders as if they were strangers. There were no goodbyes, no eye contact, as if the other had completely disappeared from their respective lives. 26 years of marriage came to an end like this, leaving only resentment and regret in each other's hearts. Kurt drives home alone, filled with mixed emotions. Despite winning the case, he didn't feel triumphant. Instead, a deep sense of defeat gripped him. Sitting in the empty living room, Kurt began to reflect on the marriage. He remembered his long years of overtime, neglecting his family for his career. All those missed family dinners, kids' shows, and even a wedding anniversary with Sue. Kurt realizes that he's putting too much energy into his work and neglecting Sue's emotional needs. While that doesn't excuse Sue's betrayal, Kurt realizes he's not to blame. Meanwhile, Sue returns to her temporary apartment. The moment she closed the door, she could no longer control her emotions and tears came to her eyes. Losing her husband, alienating her children, and disappointing even her family. Sue felt more alone and regretful than ever. In her endless self-loathing, Sue begins to look back on what she has done. She remembered the feeling of being valued when she first met David, the long-lost feeling of being listened to and understood. However, at the moment, Sue soberly realizes that that brief moment of passion will never make up for all that she has lost. She regrets that instead of facing the problem head-on and communicating properly with Kurt, she chose the most destructive way to escape. Late at night, Kurt and Sue each lay in bed, thinking back on the past. Kurt realizes that he needs to learn to find a balance between work and family and needs to be more attentive to the feelings of those around him. Sue, for her part, understands that she must take responsibility for her choices and that it will take a tremendous amount of effort to rebuild her relationship with her children. Despite the fact that they hate each other at the moment, it's clear to both Kurt and Sue that they'll have to learn to work together somehow in the future for the sake of their children. This is not the end, but a painful new beginning. They both need to learn from this failed marriage and make better choices down the road. As night falls, Kurt and Sue each fall slowly into a restless sleep with remorse for the past and confusion about the future. They all know that the road ahead is long and full of challenges, but at least they have begun the first steps of self-reflection. No matter what the future holds, they need to move on for themselves and for their children. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.